The Black Ship, Side Story, Barony of Screaming Forests, Day 3, Part 2. A thickly wooded area on the right of the driveway obstructed all views in that direction. Still, at the far end of the field there was another gatehouse of sorts, bigger than the one they had passed earlier but not huge. Wyatt estimated it was only a little larger than his home on Volantis. The gate was not locked, so Wyatt opened it. They went through to their right, immediately opposite. What was clearly the front door of the gatehouse was a footpath leading through the trees. Wyatt didn't need to look at his map to know this should lead them out into the grand gardens around the ruined great house. Judging from the appearance, the path was still passable. Hence, he decided to take it, with Elizabeth following behind. A short walk brought them out into a very overgrown garden, but there were clear footpaths still visible. Here and there, Wyatt could see other structures, stone benches, a stream with a stone footbridge over it, and in front of him was a small lake, while to his right a flat area with a corroded mesh fence around it looked to have once been several tennis courts. In the distance, through the trees in front of him, he thought he could just see the sea, and to his left he could see the ruins of the great house that once stood at the heart of the estate. Seeing nothing dangerous in the immediate area, he said to Elizabeth, "Why don't you go and see if you are right about the trees?" He watched her, full of enthusiasm, take out a notepad and run up to one of the nearby trees. He shook his head in wonder that anyone could be so excited by a tree, and looked around. The ruined building caught his attention, and an idea came into his head. As he got closer, he realized that he was right. Although much of the building was badly damaged, a lot still stood, including what looked to be a stair tower, set in the corner of the tallest part of what remained standing. Wyatt carefully approached the structure, and after a good look around, decided that the stair tower was probably stable enough to climb. So he carefully made his way up the stone staircase, being especially careful to avoid pushing against any of the walls or to make any sudden movements. He went up the 10 meters or so from the ground until he got to the top of the turret. From his new vantage point, Wyatt had a clear view of the coast. He could even see the outline of Newtown from there, thanks to his modified eyes. He looked at the rest of the building. Most of the walls still stood save where fire had burned out supports, causing sections to collapse. But there was nothing left of the roof or any of the wood, except for some charcoal and a lot of broken slates lying on the tiled floor below. Returning safely to the ground, Wyatt went and found Elizabeth. "Were you right?" he asked. Elizabeth didn't bother looking up, busy making notes in her book. "Yes, the trees and plants seem to have been brought here from all over the world. It's quite a collection. Did you have a good view from the tower?" she asked. Wyatt nodded. "It is a good view. You can see all the way to the sea and even Newtown from up there." Elizabeth asked, "So will you rebuild it as your home?" Wyatt laughed. "No, it's far too big for me. I would be happy with a house, the size of the one where we came through the trees and into the garden. Besides, the house is in the wrong place. It would be nicer sat over there by the lake, maybe up where those ruined tennis courts are. But the gardens would need to be restored and trees trimmed, and a huge amount of stuff would have to happen up here," he said, waving his arm around in a wide arc. "It would take years, I'm sure, but—" "But?" asked Elizabeth. "We are not too far from Newtown by the direct route. A bus could make it here easily in 15 or 20 minutes. I was wondering if we, and I do mean we, could make this garden into a park. It would depend on you, since I will hardly ever be here to bring it back to life. You can make use of any farm laborer, gardener, or anyone else who doesn't have any work and is willing to help." Elizabeth looked at Wyatt in shock. "But why? And also, what would you do with the ruins? Demolish them?" Wyatt pinched the bridge of his nose as he thought how best to reply, finally saying, "I'm not going to be here, you are, and you are the only person in the barony who knows about all these trees and plants. As for the ruins—" Wyatt paused again to look at what was left of the dead lord's house before he continued. "I think I'll have the builders make them safe so no bits of stone will fall off, just in case any small child tries to climb them, maybe make the staircase safer to climb so people can enjoy the views, and then leave it as a memorial for all those who died over the last 30 years on Hago. Something to say everyone makes mistakes. But now we move on, without forgetting those mistakes. What do you think?" Elizabeth didn't know what to think, but eventually she replied, I think I think it would be seen as a good thing. I was going to say a good gesture. But it's more than that, isn't it? And yes, I would love to take this on. Good. Now shall we carry on looking around the garden? On the map there looked to be something odd in this direction, said Wyatt, indicating an easterly direction with his hand that seemed to be in the same direction as the well-worn path they were on. As they walked past the long frontage of the grand ruins, Wyatt realized they were walking on a series of terraces cut into the hillside. When the shuttle had landed previously, it was on a large flat area that had been cleared for the purpose, and a set of steps had gone from there to the ruins. But now, as they walked diagonally across the garden area, he noticed that short slopes were running between the larger flat areas everywhere, all hidden beneath the long grass and other foliage that covered the garden. At ground level, the stunning views were obscured completely with out-of-control plant life. Wyatt stopped briefly, and pointing to where the views of the sea should be, said, "You might want to clear a lot of this growth away. The views in that direction go all the way to the sea." Elizabeth just nodded and wrote a brief note in her book. Looking at his map, Wyatt carried on heading roughly east, towards where he knew there was a road, exiting the overgrown garden, through a gate set into an equally overgrown hedge. On the other side of the hedge was a second driveway. This one was about the same width as the one they had entered the estate on, but the verges were wider and the trees more widely spaced. So rather than meet over the top of the drive, they left areas of shade with sunlight between. Looking around, Wyatt spotted the junction of the drive he was looking for, just a few meters back up the hill towards the ruins, but right in front of him another well-worn path seemed to carry on in the right direction, just the other side of the driveway, so he crossed over and carried on. Eventually they emerged from the trees to find themselves beside several buildings and long, high walls. The only obvious way forward was straight ahead. Through an arched gateway, this led to a small, open courtyard with an ornamental fish pond. Within it, Wyatt could see fish swimming, a somewhat rotten bench seat, and a second exit, through double wooden grated doors, or maybe gates. He wasn't sure what to call them. The grated doors led to a small room, with a door at each end to either side of him. Another pair of grated doors in front of those he had entered by. The room had multiple window-sized openings, filled with more wooden grates, and wide, waist-high stone shelves either side of the grated entrances leading to the doors. He looked at Elizabeth, asking, "Any ideas what this room was for?" After a pause, Elizabeth answered, "Not really. The grates would keep bigger animals out, but other than that I have no idea." Wyatt shrugged and opened the second pair of grated doors, and they walked through into a huge rectangular walled garden. As he exited, he saw that there were glass houses built against the inside of the north, east, and west walls, while the southern wall just had a door at its center. In the middle of the garden was a circular pool, raised up about 1/2 meter from the ground. A central fountain bubbled away gently at its center, and a watering can stood beside it. Wyatt imagined that it would be quite easy to fill such a can directly from the pool. The garden itself was full of fruit and vegetable plants, as were the greenhouses. Exploring, Wyatt and Elizabeth determined there were 5 such walled gardens, forming a U-shape each garden within the walls being 100 meters on each side. However, not all the greenhouses were completely intact. It appeared that one had many panels of glass removed, since all the others appeared to be undamaged. Wyatt guessed that the glass panes from this greenhouse may have been used to repair occasional broken panes in the other greenhouses. Taking the door that led them to the open part of the U-shape had revealed another glass house against the inside of the north wall, with a second glass house directly in front of it. This one, though, was freestanding, with glass on all sides. A central pair of doors allowed them to pass between the 2 wings of this second glass house and enter an area with further plants, including ones climbing or perhaps secured to the stone walls. In front of the open end of the U stood a massive stone and glass structure, the doors directly opposite those that Wyatt and Elizabeth had come through. It was 9 to 10 meters tall at the edges, rising another 3 meters to the peaks of its multiple glass roofs. It was made up of 3 30-meter-wide squares, laid out to form a single building 90 meters long and 30 meters wide, running north to south. Elizabeth ran over to it and opened the doors to go inside, and Wyatt followed her. Once inside, Elizabeth ran to the trees that were laid out within. "It's an orangery," she declared excitedly. "I've read about these, but I've never seen one on Hago. I didn't have any idea this was here." "This is fantastic." Wyatt interrupted her. "Sorry, but what's an orangery?" he asked. Elizabeth calmed down and gestured around him. "This building is an orangery. It's a status symbol because this climate near Newtown is much too cold to grow oranges or other citrus fruits from hot climates. So they built this great big structure so they can plant their orange trees and other exotic fruits inside. In the middle, they made a space to dine in, with all the trees bearing fruit surrounding their noble guests. It's a statement about their wealth and power." "Oh," was all Wyatt could think to say at the moment. After a few moments, he asked, "Is it useful, though?" This caused Elizabeth to think again before replying. "It's not something we need, but it's very nice to have. It means that maybe we can grow things here that are not essential, but are nice to have. This orangery can probably produce up to 10 tons of fruit per year, maybe more in a good year." Wyatt was shocked. "Just from in here?" he asked. "I'm no expert, but that sounds like a lot." Elizabeth took out one of her notebooks and flipped through a few pages, eventually finding what she was looking for. "Yes, here we are. Optimal conditions can result in orange trees providing a yield in excess of 30 tons per hectare. This room is about 1/3 of a hectare, and you can control the conditions in here really carefully." She went over to one of the windows and pointed to a device holding the window open. "This opens and closes the windows, depending on the temperature," she said, then pointed to something partly buried near the base of a tree. "And this provides a trickle of water to keep the tree alive. The water must come from higher up the mountain and be fed down a pipe to the estate. I put my fingers under the fountain in one of the walled gardens, and it was icy cold. That's probably why they have it feeding those pools. It gives the water time to warm up a bit." Wyatt shook his head in astonishment. "Fair enough. Well, how you use all this is up to you, but I think we need to see what else is here. There are, I think, some more houses just north of here, and I think some barns as well. We should at least have a look." Elizabeth sighed. "You're right, I suppose. Let's go." They exited the orangery and took the driveway in front, heading east back towards the trees. With the vague shapes of buildings beyond, suddenly Wyatt became aware of something, charging in their direction through the undergrowth. He instantly drew his guns and was ready to fire if he needed to when, bursting forth from the undergrowth, came a large goat. Elizabeth started to laugh. "Really, Wyatt? I think those are probably overkill for a goat." But then she stopped laughing as she saw what had frightened the goat. Elizabeth let out a scream as the Drazen came into view, but this time Wyatt was ready for it. It was no statue, and as 3 shots from each pistol entered its brain, it simply toppled over. Wyatt kept the pistols out and slowly looked around to ensure there were no more Drazen following the first. It seemed to be on its own, a straggler separated from the rest, perhaps. He didn't really care so long as it was dead. He slowly approached to make sure once he did so, it was clear the creature was indeed well and truly dead. There were 6 almost 5-centimeter diameter holes at the rear of its trunk where the bullets had exited. Wyatt grinned as he turned to face Elizabeth. "There is no such thing as overkill where Drazen is concerned." That was all he said, yet his voice was laced with a chilling tone of pleasure that came from deep satisfaction. Elizabeth threw up, and Wyatt waited patiently while she cleaned herself up. Once she had washed out her mouth with clean water and cleaned her face, Wyatt, still holding the pair of soul snatchers, led the way back to the main driveway. As they walked, Elizabeth asked, "How did you know?" "I didn't," replied Wyatt, going on to say, "but something scared the goat, and I just assumed the worst. We were lucky. This wasn't one of their warriors. Otherwise, I don't know if I would have been able to kill it before it killed us. Come on, we ought to find that goat and give it something nice to say thanks for the warning and for helping us remove one more Drazen from Hago." They had just reached the main driveway when the APC roared towards them. Declan, up in the turret, yelled something to the driver, and it came to a halt, scattering loose gravel everywhere. He jumped down from the vehicle and came running up to Wyatt. "Forgive me, my lord. We heard shots, and I thought you might be in trouble." Wyatt looked at Declan. "No," he said. "No trouble at all," with a small smile touching his lips. Elizabeth decided to interrupt at this point. "There was a Drazen. How can you say there was no trouble?" "It was a bloody Drazen! Those things are horrific. I'm going to have nightmares for weeks." Wyatt sighed before asking, "Are we both okay?" Elizabeth opened her mouth as if to yell something, but then simply and quietly said, "Yes." Wyatt continued, "Is the Drazen dead?" And again Elizabeth replied, "Yes." "So," Wyatt continued, "there is no problem. Neither of us has a scratch from the Drazen. The Drazen is dead, like I said, no problem." Declan spoke up, "But my lord, I have sworn to protect you, At this point, Wyatt raised his hand and Declan stopped. Then, making up his mind, Wyatt said, "Elizabeth, why don't you wait inside the APC? I need to show Declan something." "Declan, come with me, please." Elizabeth eagerly climbed into the armored vehicle, suddenly grateful for its protection, and Declan followed Wyatt back down the path through the trees. As they walked, Wyatt asked Declan, "If you had been here and seen the Drazen, what would you have done?" Declan didn't even think about it, replying, "I would have shot it in the head, my lord." Wyatt nodded, asking, "And where is a Drazen's head?" Declan paused mid-step. "It's the big flower-like thing at the top, isn't it, my lord?" They reached the body of the dead Drazen, and Wyatt reached down, pulling the coverings of the Drazen's face clear of its mouth. "This is the Drazen's mouth, and right above the mouth," he said, pointing to the 6 bullet holes, "is where the Drazen brain is. Shooting it in the head just annoys it and gets you killed. This is where you shoot a Drazen if you don't want to end up as its dinner." Declan looked down at the Drazen corpse in front of him, noting the close grouping of the shots. All 6 fell in an area no larger than his closed fist. Remembering the 3 loud bangs that had caused him to jump in the APC and rush to investigate, he realized that Wyatt must have fired 3 shots from each pistol, at the same time resulting in the 2 shots sounding like one. A shiver ran down his spine. "Yes, my lord," was his instinctive reply. Wyatt quietly said, "Shit," causing Declan to look up. But then he went on, "Declan, I do not need a bodyguard. Most of the time I fly single-seat fighters. You cannot defend me when I do that. But Princess Clara says you have good intentions and are truly honorable, that you are determined to serve. Is that right? I can't even send you away?" Declan looked into Wyatt's heterochromatic eyes and replied, "My lord, I have given my oath to save your life, in return for your saving mine. This I cannot withdraw." Wyatt nodded. "I understand," he said. "It's the same reason I had to do what I did on the gallant venture. No one could have talked me out of that either, but I'm most likely to die in space or because I upset a noble by saying the wrong thing, and you can't help me with either." Wyatt paused, thinking, remembering his oath to the prince, concerning Clara, and an idea started to form. Haltingly, he asked Declan, "Your oath is to save my life. Is that right?" Declan answered with his typical, "Yes, my lord." "And so," Wyatt continued, "would that include saving me from saying things that might cause another noble to want to kill me?" Declan grew puzzled and said, "I'm not sure I understand my lord's question." This time Wyatt grinned, replying, "And that is my point. Declan, just a few months ago I was a commoner, then the prince made me a knight banneret. Now I'm suddenly a baron. I have no training for this. I do not know the right way to talk to nobility as a noble, or how I'm supposed to behave to commoners. So far as I am concerned, I will always be a commoner. I do not need all the power, the wealth, the big palaces, any of it, but apparently I must learn how to cope with it. There is no book to read on the subject, I already checked, and while Princess Clara tells me how I need to react under certain conditions, she cannot tell me everything. Sooner or later, I worry that I will say or do something that gets her into serious trouble, and I don't want to do that. I am sure my new knight Leopold will feel the same way. So if you really want to save my life, then save me from getting myself killed by saying or doing the wrong thing when with other nobles, and perhaps you could help Leopold at the same time." He finished with a sincere smile. Declan was lost for words at first. Then, thinking about it, he said, "I believe that I might be able to help my lord. You need an advisor on etiquette." Wyatt nodded. "That sounds like it might be what I need, Declan. Do you think you could, perform that role and still honor your oath to keep me alive?" Declan asked, "Before I answer, my lord, can you tell me why you would grant me this honor?" Wyatt replied, "There are 3 reasons, Declan. The first is that I cannot just get rid of you. The second is that Princess Clara tells me I can trust you, and I know she is a very good judge of character. But the most important reason is what I saw on the gallant venture when you were dying. Despite you telling them to leave and save themselves, your men stood by you, doing their very best to save your life, when almost everyone else was panicking and trying to save their own life or trying to kill me. They were trying to save you. There are very few commoners who would willingly put their own lives at risk for any noble, especially after being told to save themselves. That tells me a lot about your servants and yourself. You are a good man, Declan, as are your staff. Both I and Her Highness will always have a need of such people. Wyatt watched Declan's face as he went through his reasons. He started off looking grimly determined, but as Wyatt mentioned Clara's opinion, his expression turned to surprise, and finally, a large smile spread across his face. He knew before Declan said a word that Declan was going to say yes. And sure enough, Declan went down on one knee, saying, "It would be my honor to serve in this role, my lord." Wyatt simply said, "Great, I'm glad we got that all sorted out now. Shall we go and find the others and go back to Newtown just in case there are more Drowsen around?" Before turning and swiftly walking back to the APC. Wyatt was surprised at how easily the vehicle turned almost on the spot, with what was later explained as its all-wheel steering. A quick trip back to the farm buildings, to load everybody else on board, and from there they turned around yet again and went down the main driveway past the ruins of the house, past the turnoff to the walled gardens and orangery, and finally to the front gates. Here there was yet another small lodge house and a massive pair of gates under an 8-meter tall by almost 5-meter wide carved stone gateway, on top of which was a statue of a deer. Once again Wyatt jumped off the APC and opened the gates, noting as he did so that they had obviously been kept greased, since they were very easy to open. He left them in the bolted open position and climbed back up to the turret for the last, just over 4-kilometer ride back to Newtown, noting that this road was of far better construction than the roads to the farms. By the time they returned, it was almost 7 o'clock, and many people had already gathered in the square. Wyatt and the others took a few minutes to freshen up before they went for the evening meal. After they had eaten, Wyatt was left sitting in the corner of the restaurant taking reports and making notes, first from those he had gone to the 3 farms with. First Ansel, the builder along with the carpenter, reported that all of the farm buildings they had examined were in good to excellent condition. There was room for improvement, but pretty much all the work required was either minor or just cosmetic, and that it could all wait until more important work in the town was finished. The vet said that from what he had seen, the porcupigs on the first farm and the deer on the second farm were in good health, but he'd not wanted to get too close to either. However, they were in far lower numbers than either farm could cope with, though he did say that he thought it was possible that at least some of the animals that had been released might still be in the area and could probably be either trapped or enticed back to the farms. The third farm had been interesting. There was evidence that it had once reared porcupigs, deer, and goats, but save for the single goat Wyatt had seen, there had been no evidence that they were still reared there. However, there were a lot of chickens, including thousands of young chicks. The mechanic's news was less welcome. Much of the more expensive farm machinery was essentially dead or dying. Still, while the larger equipment probably needed replacing, the various accessories, trailers, plows, harrows, the things that were mainly solid metal with few moving parts, on the whole seemed to have been well taken care of. He felt they could be easily restored to near-new condition with a few spare parts, a servicing, and in a few cases a fresh coat of paint. He'd given Wyatt a long list of all the things that needed to be replaced, but he'd also told him to ask the farmer, as he said some things had not been used in a long time, so maybe they were not needed anymore. Jurgen was very helpful. He had kept a total of all the records from the 3 farms. The spring planting had already taken place for the year, and so any remaining crops in silos or barns had simply not been processed as yet. All 3 farms appeared to provide a mixture of foods, though with the released porcupigs and deer, it was difficult to get an accurate assessment of just how much food would be produced each year. Jurgen felt there was far more than the 1,500 to 1,600 souls from the Eternal Garden would require, but that to take advantage of this bounty, Wyatt was going to need to invest in refrigeration, drying, or other food-preserving facilities. In total, there were well over 2,000 hectares, or 20 square kilometers, between the three farms. In size, the second was the largest, and the third was just the smallest, though Jurgen pointed out that the third farm was mainly set up to grow fruit and vegetables, plus a lot of chickens and a number, he had no idea how many, of goats. The third farm's former dairy had been converted into packing sheds for eggs, fruit, and vegetables, with those living and working on the estate providing the labor. When Jurgen mentioned that the chickens produced anywhere between 10 and 12,000 eggs a day, Wyatt had been stunned. There seemed to be far more than his previously guessed few hundred chickens per enclosure. Wyatt asked Jurgen about the machinery, and also why he thought the farms were in the condition they were. Jurgen had replied, "Sir, almost every farmer knows a bit about mechanics and how to repair buildings. You do not want to have to wait for someone to come and fix your tractor, or do a simple repair to a roof to stop the rain coming in." Wyatt now understood why the farm seemed to be in a good state of repair. The machinery was a different story. They could not get spare parts for it, or more likely they could only get limited spares. However, the buildings they could and did maintain. When he asked Jurgen about the machinery and what they really needed, Jurgen went down the list for him saying, "We need one combine harvester, but with several harvesting options. Then we can harvest wheat, barley, corn, rapeseed, certain beans, all with one machine. The farms are all close together, so it will be easy to just drive it to whichever field needs harvesting." He paused, considering the next items. "I think we need one large tractor for each farm, and a smaller one for the third, to use the smaller accessories and get inside the caged enclosures and the walled gardens. Ideally, we should have a second large tractor for the biggest of the farms, but they can always call for help from one of the other farms." Looking at the other items on the list, he went on, "A seed drill and a baler. We can share again. Also, we don't need them until later in the year. They follow the combine harvester, but we will need a root harvester for potatoes, carrots, beets, and so on. The first potatoes will be about 2 months away, but maybe if you order from one place, they can deliver everything together as a package, I don't know." Wyatt asked, "I suppose these will be expensive?" And Jurgen replied, "I'm afraid so. A new combine harvester is going to cost about 500,000 credits, a large tractor perhaps half that, but the small tractor will be much less, maybe as little as 25,000 credits. Wyatt just groaned at that, but replied, "Thank you, Jurgen. Now tell me if you could choose one of the farms, which would it be and why?" Jurgen sat and thought, and whilst he was doing so, one of the kitchen staff came out to ask Wyatt if there was anything she could fetch for him. Wyatt was about to say no, but then he realized he was still hungry, and his throat was dry from all the talking, with more to come, so he said, "Can you find me something cold and refreshing to drink, please? And I don't suppose there's any more of that bread pudding from this morning?" Her reply was a simple, "I shall go and see, sir." And as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone again. Jurgen, however, chose that moment to reply, "I think, sir, that if you were to give me a choice, I'd choose the first farm we went to this morning. It's a good size, but not too big to manage, and I can see potential there for further improvements, though I'll need someone to help me run it." Wyatt's reply was an instant, "It's yours, and I'm sure we can find you an assistant. There were several people on the ship who claimed to be farmers. Now why don't you go into the bar and have a drink? You have earned it. And perhaps if you see him you can send Eino Riesenkampf out, please." As Jurgen left, the young woman from the kitchen came back with a glass jug filled with a slightly green liquid, and a plate with some more of the bread pudding that he had enjoyed earlier in the day. She placed them in front of him and said, "The water is really cold from the tap, but I added some apple cordial that one of the people searching found earlier today. I hope that's okay, sir. We still had 6 squares of the bread pudding left over, so I brought you the largest. Oh, and tomorrow there will be apple cake. One of the other searchers found a warehouse full of apples." Wyatt thanked her, and as she went back to the kitchen, and Wyatt poured himself a glass of cordial, Eino came out, and Wyatt gestured towards the seat opposite, then broke off a bite-sized piece of the bread pudding. Savoring the rich, sweet taste of the pudding, Wyatt then cleared his mouth with some of the cordial. The young woman was right. It was refreshing. Then he looked across at Eino and said, "Okay, we have a warehouse full of apples, and someone found a bottle of excellent apple cordial. Now what else has happened today in Newtown?" This caused Eino to laugh. Then he picked up a series of sheets of paper. "Okay, sir, where to start?" The locksmiths were a brilliant idea. All the houses use the same brand and type of lock, as do all the shops. There was a little hand-turned machine in the locksmith shop, and apparently the locks all have serial numbers on them, which, if you are a locksmith and have the handbook from the lock company also discovered in the shop, means you can make a new key in less than 10 minutes, just while sat, outside whatever house needs to be unlocked. I had no idea. So, 56 homes that were locked are now unlocked, and we have keys for those doors. The other locksmith took a set of lockpicks. Since there was only a single portable key cutter, he opened a mix of businesses. Additionally, when there were locked homes close by, he opened those as well. So, an extra 549 homes were checked today, and only 3 need repairs before they can be used. Also, one of the locksmiths had a look at the house that's attached to the shop and says if it's okay with you, he'd like to take it. Apparently it's nice. Wyatt added those to the list, giving him 1,026 homes that could be occupied, before saying, "If the locksmith likes the locksmith's house, that's fine by me. Tell him it's his. I suggest the other locksmith looks at one of the houses nearby unless he prefers another location and doesn't mind the walk." Ino said, "I'll let them know tomorrow." Also, they said that most places, except the industrial units and warehouses that they have looked at so far, have the same type of locks. You might want to order a few thousand of those key blanks, I asked. They are not expensive. They said expect to pay about 10 credits for a pack of 24 blanks. It was Wyatt's turn to laugh now. "Thank you, I know. Those are the cheapest things so far today, so we have the homes. What about the other buildings?" Ino looked at his list. "Well, we have a brewery. I am going to assume that's where the beer came from, as we've not found anywhere else. There are a couple of what appear to be small chemical processing plants. These were on the same road as the brewery, on the eastern side of town. Lots of stainless steel pipes and various cylindrical vessels is how they were described to me, but one apparently might have once been a sugar-making, or maybe refining factory. I was told they could just make out the words, Hago Sugar, in faint letters beneath a thin layer of white paint. We need people who understand chemical processes to have a look at those. The larger industrial buildings are located to the east, probably because the road over there is wider. Nobody attempted to enter the brewery or the chemical facilities. According to them, they wouldn't have known what to look for, so they simply looked through the windows. The doors were all locked. Then the party that was looking at the larger buildings carried on down the road and found a few interesting locations, including a small electric vehicle factory and an engine shed with a locomotive inside. Wyatt's eyes opened wide in surprise. "What?" he cried out. "I thought the railway line stopped on the west, except for that narrow gauge line down the street by the locksmith's shop." Ino nodded, saying, "They do, but at the end of that narrow gauge line, there is an engine shed and a workshop. There's also a couple of sidings with some flat wagons along with some spare wheels. The door was bolted but not locked, so they had a look inside, then they came and found me. I sent our diesel mechanic to have a look." Wyatt winced, then said, "Okay, how bad?" Ino, smiling, said, "Not that bad, actually." Consulting his notes, he continued, "It needs all the fluids draining and refilling and some of the flexible hoses, in his words. Better to do all of them. Need to be replaced along with a full service, but he thinks it will run, provided there was nothing wrong with it when they put it away. Since he guessed I would ask, he had a look at the wagons outside on the siding as well. He said they need a thorough cleaning, rust removal, and repainting, plus greasing the moving parts. Beyond that, they are pretty straightforward, so they should be easy to put right." At that, Wyatt smiled, saying, "Well, at least that's one thing that hopefully will not cost me a fortune. Not long ago, I was just having to look after myself and send a few credits to my family. Now I have over 1,500 people to look after and have to work out how best to spend my prize money to do so." With a sigh, he continued, "So tell me about the vehicle factory, and anything else they found today." Ino carried on, while Wyatt continued taking notes. "Not much to tell about the factory. They appear to make small electric vehicles, probably ideal for local use. They must have brought in the batteries from somewhere on Hago. There are lots of records in the office. I'm sure we could work out from where. There are a lot of what look to be new parts on shelves in a warehouse on the site. There are also a few vehicles apparently in need of repair in their enclosed yard, and there is also a working one, a small refrigerated tanker, which looks like it was the milk collection vehicle, I talked with Elizabeth earlier. She says any vehicle that could be used to help defend against the Drazan would have been taken. So what's left? Well, they either couldn't think of a use for them, or they were broken. Taking a moment to clear his throat, he continued. So, we have one working tanker. It has a tank that can take 3,000 liters according to the gauge. That's the biggest of the vehicles. Then there are two small trucks the same size. According to the metal plates, they can take a 1.2-ton maximum payload in the rear. One, I think, is a sort of waste-collecting truck. It's got a rear section that can tip to one side with low solid sides and another meter of mesh wall above. The other has half-meter high sides and tips to the rear and maybe was used as a builder's truck. All three of those trucks have a small cab with doors that can take a driver and passenger. Finally, there is a much smaller vehicle. It has an enclosed box on the rear, a bit over 1 meter on each side, with a roller door at the back, marked for loads up to 600 kilos. It has just a driver's seat in its enclosed cab. While the two medium-sized vehicles are marked as needing service, the little one is marked as needing repairs to its steering. We would need to get more mechanics down from the Eternal Garden, and maybe some machinists if we need to use the factory, but inside the buildings everything looked clean and tidy, ready to go, so to speak. Wyatt looked across at Aino. "You went inside yourself?" he asked. Aino replied, "Yes, I was, surprised when I heard they were making vehicles here, even if they are just small ones. I wanted to see for myself. It would need people who know what they are doing to confirm it. But I think the factory was still producing things and repairing them right up until a month ago. There was no dust collecting on the worktops, and, well, everything looked clean, as if they had just put down their tools and left." Wyatt was surprised. He had assumed everything on Hago was purely military, but perhaps there had been reasons to keep other places, not just the farms, operational. "What about other buildings, that restaurant by the harbor, for instance?" he asked. Aino didn't need to look at his notes for that. The restaurant is, I think you could say, basic. It's designed to be swept out with some sort of plastic floor covering. Even though all the windows and doors were shut, a small amount of sand had still managed to get in. The kitchen is more basic than the one here at the inn, and the cooking appears to have mainly been fried food. There were only a few cooking pans, but there were several fryers. The plumbing and lighting were working, and there was a freezer that appeared to have been used for displaying ice creams. It made a sound when I switched it on, so I left it on, intending to check it tomorrow to see if it was really cold. Still, the cooking equipment was all dead. I think maybe a storm had broken some of the windows on the beach side and damaged the area, and no one had bothered to repair it afterwards. The display freezer is at the front of the building, so maybe the water didn't get to it. The building needs washing, sweeping out, and new cooking equipment, and then it should be fine. He waited for Wyatt to finish taking notes before continuing. Now, as to what else was discovered, there was a small warehouse, pretty well full of crates containing apples. I have no idea how many, but it must be many hundred tons. The crates have various names chalked on. I asked Elizabeth about those too. She said the names are the varieties of apples. Some are for cooking, so I had a couple of the guys go and each grab a couple of bags full for the cooks. There's a workshop that seems to have been used to repair agricultural machinery and equipment. The team that found that place said it's dirty and untidy, but there's a lot of stuff in there, both tools and other equipment. You have a good-sized builder's yard, or at least there's a place that has all sorts of basic building tools, including a couple of small cement mixers and some bags of cement, which strongly suggests that's what it was used for. There's what I think is a tannery for leather. We're not entirely sure, as no one here knows the process, but there were pits filled with liquid, piles of tree bark, and a lot of leather hides. So it makes sense. There's a cannery, not huge, but it doesn't appear to have been used for some time. That might explain why so many homes seem to have made their own preserved food items. It's all covered in dust, so I have no idea what needs doing. Next to the cannery is a small refrigeration facility, again not used in some time, probably because it needs more electricity than we currently have. It appears to have been set up for both ice-making and freezing foods. The assumption of ice-making was based on the water feed into a section of the facility. An odd one, this. There is a place that seems to turn sawdust into egg boxes and paper. I have no idea how that works. But there are big piles of both at the start of the production line and lots of piles of egg boxes at the end. Wyatt laughed, saying, "That's a relief. One of the farms produces a lot of eggs, so having a place in town that can make egg boxes will be useful." But get people to bring their egg boxes back to the shop for refills and only recycle them if they get damaged, he added, making another note. Ino carried on. Not far from the sewage treatment plant there is a glassworks. It's not been used for a while. I think they probably used gas generated at the sewage plant to heat their kilns, which makes sense given the abundance of fine beach sand. Once the sewage plant started to malfunction, it probably didn't generate enough gas. They also found a maintenance yard near the treatment plant, which was full of equipment and supplies for cleaning drains. There was one of those small electric vehicles there with a trailer as well. Wyatt raised a finger and asked, "Stuff?" Ino smiled apologetically. "I'm sorry, Wyatt. The guys that found it gave me all sorts of technical names, but I only have so much material for writing on, and I'm guessing neither of us would have any idea what they were talking about, so I shortened it to equipment and stuff for drain cleaning." Wyatt agreed. "You're right. We can leave that to the experts. What else was found?" Ino continued. "There are half a dozen woodworking places, some of which were being used recently. Also, one large warehouse was full of big woodworking equipment. I had one of the carpenters go there in the afternoon and have a look. He said it is full of big computer-controlled machining centers, the sort of thing you use to turn big timbers into long house beams or fancy wooden parts of furniture. The largest machine can process timber about 10 meters in length. It's just covered in huge sheets of plastic, clean, rust-free, and ready to go maybe. The carpenter who looked at it says he recognizes the company name, but these bits of equipment were probably made before he was born. I do have the list of equipment, though, so maybe we can still get manuals and spares? That's it for today, I'm afraid." Wyatt nodded and then yawned. "Thank you, Ino," he said. "It's been a very long day for everyone. Tomorrow will be more of the same, but then, hopefully I can start ordering things." Then Wyatt picked up the glass and the plate and took them to the inn's kitchen before going upstairs and falling into bed. As he drifted off to sleep, he still felt he was only a tiny bit wiser, but right now he was going from no idea of what he was doing to maybe just an idea.